Question right now is, how have you been holding up through all this whole entire pandemic stuff?
Yeah, I mean, all things considered, doing all right. You know, I think as far as creativity, right? Like that's a question I wrestle with a lot. It's pretty tough. I go through phases of extreme creativity where I'm really just tapped into, I'm writing a lot, I'm producing a lot, it's just kind of flowing. And then there's weeks that I just really can't get anything done. And I think it's this weird kind of dichotomy of, I'm an introvert naturally. And I used to think before all of this, like, oh man, I just can't wait to get home and not have to do with people. And, it felt very draining. Right. And so music was kind of my escape from that. And I put a lot of my energy to that. But now I'm like craving being around people, and it's bringing both new creative energy, but also a lack of creative energy when I can't be around people. So, in that sense, it's been a little weird, but also I've gotten a lot of music made during this. So it's been a blessing and also a curse sometimes.
Yeah. And I feel like I've asked this like 4 or 5 times, but I do feel like it's important because most people that listen to the show are musicians themselves. And so they find themselves in specific entertainment hubs. And it's always interesting to see how other places have been handling it. Now, for me, I haven't been able to really travel much since all this started. And I'm based in the West Coast in Los Angeles, California. Yeah. But I love New York, where you're from. And New York is like a second home to me. I think it's one of the most beautiful cities in the world. I've heard so many things about how quarantine has been handled there. I'm just wondering, in your opinion, when it comes to excuse me, when it comes to your own personal life and the way musicians have been handling it, how is it in New York right now for artists in general, for people in general? I'm just curious.
Yeah, it's for music, it's pretty dead. It's kind of sad. I live across from Knitting Factory, which is a club in Brooklyn, and I literally walk by it to go get coffee every day, and I see like, oh man, it's just so dead there. And what's really sad is that's kind of where I was planning on hopefully doing my album release show. And so it's just kind of the ghost of like what could have been. I think a lot of people have that weight on them right now who are creatives. Whether you're playing shows that you can't do right now, or you're an artist who's going to be showing visual work in a gallery, it's like you kind of walk by all these really notable places in New York, and it's just like, man, that's different. That's not why I'm here. And, sometimes it's hard to reconcile, just not being able to participate in New York, right? And at the same time, it's still New York. There's still, millions of people walking around every day and living their lives, but I think it's been really hard on the city from what I've experienced, at least.
Yeah, it's something I've been hearing across the board, no matter what city you're talking about. Everything is closed off, and I know that people are making huge strides in trying to open things up, but it's one of those things where I think at this point it's still a little difficult to say, for musicians at least, when things are going to be up and running where you can actually go out and do shows safely and all that. Maybe when everyone gets a vaccine or something like that, it might actually open up. But for you, I'm wondering, sorry about that. I'm wondering for you, as someone I would consider you an up-and-comer, but I'm not sure what you would consider yourself. But I know you're someone who's kind of in the grind of it all. You've gotten some good traction. People are talking about what you're doing. So I imagine you're sort of in the thick of it, and you're in an interesting position because a lot of artists that come on the show tend to be, some of them are more established, some of them are not. But I do find that the strategy is vastly different depending on where you are, obviously. Sure. So for you, being in quarantine and seeing how things are opening up, and like you were saying, you wanted to have your album released, but all that's out the door. Are you starting to make plans if for the future? Do you find yourself not even wanting to, like a little discouraged to even try and make plans to like perform and stuff? Or maybe you're exploring completely different avenues because of where we're currently at. But I guess I'm wondering, in your position of where you are, receiving some good momentum, but being blocked off from what would normally be done, I'm wondering, where is your motivation taking you at this point?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I love the phrase that fate doesn't give a fuck about your plans. I think the phrase is a little less crass than I make it, but I try to make plans, and I also just try to kind of go with the flow and be, a little bit transitory in terms of how I'm planning this album. My girlfriend always makes fun of me, right? Because she's like, you always pick totally unrealistic dates to put things out. Just try to, I was planning on putting my album out in May, and I was like, I'm just going to give it some time. And I'm going to go with the flow and see what happens. And so, I'm kind of just going single to single right now. And I'm just going to, as you said, keep that momentum going, because I think right now it's really it's hard to put out a project, when you can't really go out and support it. And so I think that playing live shows and having that energy in the same room as people, and it's a really good way to connect with people that you don't know, that are just, maybe they're there supporting another band, or they're there just to have a drink and just see some new music. It's a great way to catch up people to what you're doing. And without that, it's just really, really hard to consider, like, how do I put out a project? How do I, even something as simple as getting a space to shoot a music video, right? It's very much like flying by the seat of our pants sometimes in this like up and coming music space. So, I try to plan, I try to do things for each song, giving it the love and the respect it deserves. But, as far as long-term plans, it's pretty hard to picture those right now.
Yeah, I've been meaning to ask this with other musicians, but it just crossed my mind again. So I'm going to ask you, and I do feel like you're in a really good position to answer it. When it comes to live streaming, for example, a lot of artists have, jumped on that bandwagon, and some of them say it's like one of the greatest things ever. I keep my ear pretty low to the ground, so I try my best to kind of gauge where everybody's at. And I have my own opinions of it, but I feel like I am very interested in finding out how you see it, because again, you are in a very interesting position where you are starting to get there, right? Which is a place where a lot of artists are dying to get to. Yeah. But in my experience, when you get to that point where you're at, that's where like it's very crucial to just like hit it hard. And that's why this pandemic has been so, stressful for a lot of people. Anyways, my point is, live streaming, I feel like, was really cool before. It was very niche, I guess you would say. And then pandemic happened and everyone jumped on it. And now everyone's like saying, you got to do it. It's the best way to perform. I am just kind of wondering, in your opinion, and again, depends on everyone's style, but in your opinion, is that the new way to kind of perform while we're in this? Do you feel like it's beneficial to artists that are in your position, that are kind of on the rise, but that really need to grind kind of thing? I don't know. I guess what I'm asking is, we can't perform, and the only thing that I see that is a viable option is live streaming. So to you, has it been good? Do you like it? I don't know.
Yeah.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
No. I love this question, because I have done one Zoom show this entire time. And I think it was a charity show. It was a couple weeks after the lockdown started in New York, and it was just hectic. I think part of playing live is like, there's always that element of reality to it. There's also the element of the reality setting in, like, oh, technology can go wrong, right? And I think doubly so with anything that's over the internet, where it's in real time. So if you're playing a show and a cable breaks, okay, cool, we can pop a new cable in. If something goes wrong, I normally play with this setup where I'm playing, I have a Roland drum pad, I'm playing piano, guitar, I'm trying to get all of these things going at the same time, and there's a lot of moving parts. So there's a little stress to that, but I know that, okay, if it all goes to shit, I can just pick up my guitar and play these songs. With Zoom or, whatever medium you're playing a live stream over, it feels very containing, because, I'm just sitting in my home, and it can be very exposing, but also what's really exposing is that technology is less under your control, because it's like the stream can crash, your computer can die if you don't plug it in, your computer can overheat, just all these things that are out of your control that are way harder, or at least for me, because I'm instinctually like trained at this point from having played so many shows to, okay, I know if this goes wrong, I can fix this thing, right? Yeah. And with this, it's like, yeah, if it goes out, I'm screwed. So I've tended to not play a lot of live streams, and I will be putting myself on the spot at some point doing that, because I think if things continue to not open up, I'm going to do an album release Zoom show, and I'm still figuring out how I'm going to do that. But I think
you kind of have to at this point, right?
Yeah, I do think to the second part of your question, though, it is a really good vehicle for people who are up and coming, though, to kind of connect with fans on a different way. Like, that was always one of my favorite things about social media, is you can obviously you can connect, but you can kind of get inside the lives of the people that you look up to, you listen to, you respect, in creative fields or celebrities. And so it's just another vehicle to do that. And I think what's really important as an independent artist, as somebody who's up and coming, is like, how do you bridge that gap and make a connection with somebody? How do you get that fan to really connect and vibe with what you're doing to the point where they want to be invested in what you're doing? And so I think live streams, if done in a way that can cut through some of the clutter and the chatter that's happening right now with all these, I think it's very saturated how many live streams we have. I think it can be a really good vehicle.
Yeah, and I'm glad you bring that up, because I don't necessarily want to tell people not to do anything. Yeah. I'm a big fan of anyone doing what they want in their own specific way, but I do feel like that medium got saturated really fast. But there's still some cool stuff happening with it every now and then. I think the idea is just to do it as uniquely as possible. You did say something a little earlier that piqued my interest a little bit, because kind of going back to what I said a little bit earlier in the interview, you are making very interesting music that's incredibly unique that I haven't heard before. It definitely stands out there. Like, if I put your song next to 9 other pop songs, I mean, you're welcome, but it is true. If I put your song next to 9 other pop songs, I'm pretty sure your song will stand out. And I'm not sure if it's going to be everyone's favorite, but they're going to remember it because it's different. And so I'm genuinely wondering, like you said a little earlier, it's about engaging with the fans and kind of gaining that trust. And even though we were talking about live streaming, I do think it's important because your music has managed to capture people's attentions by it being so different. So I'm wondering for you, do you understand why your music has been capturing a nice little niche audience? Do you feel like is it because of how different it is? Is it maybe because it's more emotional and it cuts deep into like people's souls and understanding? I don't know. I guess I'm wondering for you, do you understand why it's reaching people, in your opinion?
Yeah, I never understand why. It's a hard thing, right? Because it can be so many different things, and it's unique to every single person who listens to it. I know for me, hearing people who have listened to the song who I'm close with, whether it's other musicians I trust or friends, family, whoever it is, the thing I always look for is, does somebody get something more out of the song than I intended? And with this song in particular, I wrote it for a very particular reason. I wrote it for a very particular person. And so my only goal in making the song was to kind of give a gift to my partner. And outside of that, it was something that I love the song and it fit on the album. So I'm going to put this on the record. But hearing people who have come to me and say, to me, this song is really about this idea of growing a garden, where I remember a friend of mine who's an LA-based artist who was like, it feels like you're capturing that moment of people are being forced to stay indoors, and a lot of us are using the time to kind of grow our own gardens, and he said, to grow a garden where it shouldn't be growing. To me, I took that to mean like there's this dark cloud over the world right now. But I think one thing that is really good that's coming out of it is a lot of people are getting the chance, having the luxury of time to explore things that they never had the time to explore, a hobby, a passion, their craft, whatever it is. And that's not something I ever thought of for the song. It just kind of was something that somebody else took from it. And so I can't imagine how many other little permutations of that feeling there are with the song. And that's the coolest thing for me as a songwriter, is like, oh, that's what you felt. That's something that I never even would have thought of writing, but that's what you took from it. And I think that's like the coolest thing in the world about music.
Interesting. I'm wondering, I'm pretty sure I know the answer, because you just, you said how much it means to you when people let you know what they thought of your song and that sort of thing. I have very recently, I worked with an artist. I'm not going to say who, but long story short, we co-produced this song, and some people heard of it, right? And even though it's doing well and people like it, there was an instance where someone completely, in the other artist's mind, misunderstood what this song was about, and it bothered them. And in reality, it kind of bothered me too, a little bit, just by association. And it's interesting because I talk to a lot of songwriters like you, and I also think about legendary songwriters like Bob Dylan, for example, who in very famous interviews Was it Bob Dylan? I don't want to misquote. So, so definitely check me on that, people, because I don't know. But I want to say it's Bob Dylan. But in a very famous interview, I guess he said he was asked, like, hey, what does this song mean? Or what does it mean when you say this, blah, blah, blah. And his answer very famously was, it doesn't matter. Like, what does it mean to you? Right. And it's just very open like that, how once he made it, he just kind of let it go. And I find that there are two schools of thought sometimes. A lot of artists like yourself are very much cool with understanding their motivation of their song, and then they just release it and let it go. But there's a nice core, smaller group of artists that I would say are very much like, no, this song means this, and I made it because of this, and it's very important that people understand why it was made, right? So I'm wondering for you, do you ever feel like there's music that you make that because your music's so unique, that people need to understand why it was made and what's the point of it? Or do you never care? Do you subscribe to the idea that music and art should just be interpreted the minute it's out from your hands, if that makes sense?
Yeah, no, it does. I think I'm of two minds about it, right? There's always the ego component of like, I want in some way, some of the reasons that I make music, not all of them, but part of it is I started making music because I wanted to be understood. Part of it is I want to understand myself. But also coming from a really lonely place when I was a kid and started writing music. I think there was a part of that inside of myself that I had to get over as I got older, of that ego of like, I need people to understand this. I need to make something that people are going to love. And, as I've gotten older, as I've made more music, I think as I've refined what I'm trying to do, I'll always tell people what I think the song means to me, because that's important to me, right? I write songs for either somebody or for myself or for the world, whatever it is. I do have intention and I can't take my intention out of it. But at the same time, I'm never going to get angry at somebody for taking something completely different than what I meant, because I think that's cool. I'm sure I've done that with many songs, no matter how many times I've poured over the lyrics or, listened to an artist do an interview where they're talking about the song. Once you put something out in the world, it's not for you anymore. And that's something that I've had to get comfortable with, but it's something I really enjoy, is kind of letting it go and seeing what happens and seeing what people take from it. Because that's the other reason I make music, is trying to build a community and give people a place to say, oh, okay, someone else is going through something that I'm going through. Even if it's not what I intended, it's someone else is writing something that speaks to me. And a great example that I think of is like Tracy Chapman's Fast Car, right? The lyrics in that are so literal. They're poetic, of course, but it's a narrative song. And, when you hear her talk about it, she's like, I made it up. Like I made a story up. And you can look at people just still 30 years later debating that song and putting themselves into it and say, wow, you captured what I was feeling in that moment. You wrote about my life. And I think that's the power of music right there. And so that was a very long-winded way of saying, I think I straddle both sides of that question.
Yeah. No, and I think it's a very good answer, because I do feel like it depends on who you are. But I do agree with you. I think on average, art is something that is open to interpretation no matter what. Yeah. I don't know why, but I talking about this reminds me of George Lucas a little bit. I'm a huge Star Wars fan.
Oh, same. Nice.
Yeah, there you go. But you know how like in the Star Wars community, I feel like on average, most people can agree that George Lucas has re-released the originals a little bit way too much, to the point where like the original Star Wars, you can't find it anywhere because I think it was digitally remastered and they added effects. And anyways, I think unanimously, a lot of fans are very much like, hey, we love the originals for what they were. But there is this sort of understanding that George, there's this sort of, there was things he couldn't do at the time when he made movies. So he's been obsessed over fixing that throughout his career, right? And so there, he's almost like, even though I'm not a master filmmaker, so he's clearly on a different level than me, so don't take my opinions for that. But I guess my observation just being that I do feel like what he's done with a lot of his original work, even though everyone can agree that the original is a masterpiece, the creator of this masterpiece is 100% dissatisfied and still is to this day with what he made and has actively made steps to fix that. So I guess I'm wondering, you ever feel like as artists, it's almost like we're destined to get to that point where we will hopefully get better and more successful and bigger, and then look back at what we've made and been like, I don't like that. Maybe I should remake it. No, I don't think this happens a lot in music, but it's just like an interesting concept. I feel like a lot of artists are rarely 100% satisfied with what they make. So I'm wondering, for music, is that key to be able to be like a successful artist? Is that ability to just like let it go? Or you might start to obsess way too much to the point where one day you might try to remaster everything you've ever done and, take away the original, if that makes sense. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it does.
Branching off here.
It does. No. And I think the George Lucas example is a great one, right? And I've never seen the original Star Wars, the original Star Wars, right?
Like original.
Yeah, I've seen the movies, but I had the remaster, I think the 1990 something remaster box set when I was a kid, right? So I don't like it. I think that an example I can think of in the music industry is like Kanye, right? And when he put out Life of Pablo, and he was constantly changing that thing. Even the day after he put out, he would put out Fade and then take it off the next day and put it back on the day after, and be tweaking really small things in the mix. And I get it. I get that feeling of being unsatisfied. Because to your point, at least in my experience, I'm never satisfied with the song. I can say it's done. I can say it's what it needs to be or what the song wants to be. But at that point, I have to take myself out of it. And I think I used to really like that idea of because George Lucas and Kanye are similar in the sense that they've built this community around them and people want to actively participate in that community. They're remixing Kanye songs or doing freestyles or, with George Lucas, it's cosplay or, now people who grew up watching him are making movies for Lucasfilm. And I think that's really cool. The community aspect of it is really cool. But I think where artists can run into trouble is if we try to be perfectionists. And that's something that I've had to kind of strip out of myself as an artist. Like, don't be a perfectionist. Because I look back to the EP I put out in 2018. I was listening to that the other day and I was like, man, I didn't mix this thing well at all. Wow. And I'm like, the songwriting is fine. The songs are good. And maybe it's because I'm a little more detached from them now that they've been out for a couple of years. And I remember turning to my girlfriend, I was like, should I take these songs down? And we had because she's an artist too, and we had a little debate and discussion over it. It's like, yeah, do you take things that aren't representative of you now off, right? And I think what that is a slippery slope. The reason I decided not to do it is because I was like, no, that's the journey. That's where I was in that moment. That's a representation of who I was musically. And I think it's really, really cool, despite the rough edges on it, to see where I was, where I am now, and hopefully where I am in the future. I can look back and say, wow, yeah, no, I didn't do that one to the best I could, or I could now. But the slippery slope is if you start taking things down or modifying after it's been out, especially after it's been out for a couple of years, it's like, all right, you're going to do that to everything. It's never going to be a finished product. And it gives you the license to like, okay, if I take that down, maybe I'll take this other one down. And to me, it's like, no, I made a project. I made it for a reason. It's out there. And I like that. I like that journey.
I completely agree. I do think that it's a very slippery slope, quoting you, when you start to want to change everything that you've done before. I do feel like it's a beautiful thing when you're able to look back at what you've made and understand like, hey, I'm way better now. Like, it's exciting to see, for example, I'm an artist as well. And like, it's exciting to see some of my earlier paintings, right, from like years ago, and then see where you are now. And you're like, oh, wow. Like, I remember when I couldn't do that and now I can. And it's great. And taking things down would be the equivalent of me burning those old paintings, right? And like, no one's ever going to see this, right?
Yeah.
Now that's very generic. Kind of like sidestepping a little bit. Here's an interesting concept. One thing that's happening a lot right now, or is about to start happening a lot, based on a lot of like, music insiders, is the whole idea of a lot of artists remastering the original works. The classic or Class A example right now is Taylor Swift, right? Who re-recorded that album. Which album was it she re-recorded?
I think it was her first one.
Yeah, right. And she re-recorded it for it to sound exactly the same. But the reasons why she did that are obviously for licensing purposes, so that she could own her masters and whatnot. Now, I'm wondering, in your opinion, it is remaking the same stuff for different reasons. But do you feel like that, number one, do you feel like that's going to be a trend that's going to take off amongst people that can actually do that? And B, is that better? You know, like if it's going to sound, I don't know. I feel like I'm treading some very shaky waters here, but my whole point is, in your opinion, is that a good thing? Because speaking out of like, hey, we've released something, it's artwork, it's shaped people's life regardless of the back end.
Yeah.
It's out, right? Is it all right to kind of go in and like be like, well, I made it, so let me remake it for whatever reasons, right? I don't know. I'm just curious what you think about that. And I can tell you what I think afterwards too. That way we're kind of on level fields here.
Yeah, no, I think there's two things going on in there, right? In that question, I think specifically related to the Taylor Swift example.
Right.
Obviously what's going on with her is, I think in one sense, really good for artists, right? She's taking a stand to a very, very powerful figure in the music industry and saying, no, I am going to do this the way that I'm going to do this, and reclaiming power for herself as an artist. And I think that is a good example for other artists, you know, to be able to say, I have my vision. I want to go forward the way that I think is best for my art. We all bring people into our art, and there's a level of trust that's extended to, to people that we choose to collaborate with, work with. Some things never see the light of day. Some things are business partnerships. And I think many, many artists will have the experience, could tell you the story of a time where it's like, no, I got into the wrong thing. This person took advantage of me in some way, or just did me dirty in some way. And so on that point, I think it's good what she's doing. The other point of it is, she's also, to what you said earlier, she's an artist who can do that. She has the resources.
Right.
She has the money, the time. She is a superstar. And I think, getting back to the original part of the question of, is this going to become a trend? I don't know. It could be, but I don't think it's going to be a trend among people who don't have the resources to do so. And it's something that I think, like, remasters can be cool, right? A lot of times people can't tell the difference. And I don't like to, you know, I don't say that to talk down to anybody, but like I went to school for audio engineering, and I can't tell the difference between some masters sometimes, right? So I think some of it can be like a marketing thing. But at the end of the day, it's like, there will be trends. Some of them will happen and stay, some of them won't. But I think what it comes down to is, like, when we look at smaller artists, like, some trends you can tap into because they don't require, like, a trend on social media. You can tap into that easily. Most of them are free of cost. But something like mastering takes resources, money, time, connections a lot of times to get it done the right way. And so I think it's just, to me, another example of things in the music industry that will be very top heavy, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a very good answer, because I do feel like more power to someone like Taylor Swift, who, by the way, did a great job with that. I don't know if you call it a remaster. I feel like it's its own thing at this point.
I think she re-recorded everything.
Yeah, everything's just re-recorded to how to re-release. I guess you can say it's like that. And I do agree with you. I do feel like if you're going to do it to regain power, then, you know, by all means. There's an example. I don't want to say the artist's name, because just out of respect. But I have my partner's a very big fan of this artist, right? And has been a big fan of hers for a very long time, for years, like more than a decade. And, you know, this artist has managed to have a very massive, loyal following, semi-underground, but also kind of mainstream. Anyways, I feel like I'm going to give it away. My point is, this artist also decides to remake the original album too, before Taylor Swift, actually. And I believe for similar reasons, I think, maybe to be able to own the masters and whatnot. But what ended up happening, according to my partner and other fans as well, even though it was well received, it was also kind of like, well, we all stuck around with you because we loved you from the very beginning, through the struggles and all. And now that the original has been remade, it's not that it's not good. It's just there was a sort of charm to the original, and now it's like we sort of feel like what's the word? I don't know what I'm trying to say. It's like not left out, but it's like there's what we loved you for, the original. It's almost as if you're turning your back on that,
Yeah.
and you just want this brand new thing and hopefully get new fans out of it, kind of thing. And
Yeah.
again, I'm speaking for a whole bunch of people. I'm not I'm not at all in charge of these people or have any right to say this. I'm just saying what I've observed. And I'm wondering for you, it's kind of weird that we're talking about this. I love it.
Yeah, it's such a rabbit hole. It's great.
It is. And I do find I feel like you are someone perfect to talk about that because again, you are on this, rise. And so you will get there someday. And it's interesting to understand where your mind is when it comes to that. In your opinion, in that perspective where you try to remake something and you try to make it like exactly the same, but it's just not as good. And you've tried to change it in ways where it's not as good. Is that also a good thing or a bad thing? Or does it not matter?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, caveat, we're talking high level things here, right? That's always a case by case.
Exactly. Exactly.
But, I think it does kind of go back to that conversation we were having a few minutes ago about just in general art right now. And I think there's this tendency in this world we live in where there is so much, I hate to put it this way, but competition, right? So many songs are millions and millions and millions of songs are uploaded to Spotify every day. We are saturated. And I think there's this pressure I definitely feel it, to be perfect, to be pristine, to have everything, every box checked off and hope that guarantees you success. And it never does. And I think when you look at this conversation specifically about going back and recreating what you've done, I can see in certain cases, if an artist is trying to get their masters back or something like that, there's I'm sure plenty of others, but I think if it's just tinkering, if it's just an uncomfortability with imperfection, it's like, what's the goal? As an artist, you have to be honest with yourself and evaluate, is my goal to be perfect and to have pristine art and to make my art as good as it can be by other people's standards? Or is it to be true to what I am in this moment? And that's enough for me. I think there's, obviously there's gradients in between. Those are the two, I think, polarities of it. But I think when you look at this question at the heart of it, it's like, really, like, what's your view on art? Is it something malleable? Is it something that should be updated, like a software update to your album or your song or something? Or is it something that you can put out and just let it sit? And I don't know. I think it's a very nuanced individual decision that every artist has to make. I know personally, it's not something I'm consciously choosing, that it's not something I'm going to do. Because I think I've gotten to a place, and I've worked really hard to get to a place, that I can just put something out, leave it, and whatever happens with it, happens with it. If it's successful, great. If it's not, great. But that's, again, going back to the journey of it, that's part of the journey for me. That's part of the excitement of it. Not every song is perfect. Very few songs are like, how do you even define perfect, right? But
right.
I think when you're going,
you out of all people would know, being an engineer.
Well, that's another thing, right? Engineers, I think there's this like subculture of engineers and audiophiles, and you can go on any Reddit message board and just constant bickering about the smallest little things. And I'm like, I've gotten pulled into that, of course. And, it's definitely something that can be fun, but has its limits. I think really what it comes down to for me is like staying true to myself and staying true to people who have invested their time, their love, their support, their energy, sometimes their money, whatever it is, into what I'm doing. Because I think I owe it to them, right? Once I've put something out and people have consumed it and people have listened to it, connected with it on an emotional level, I don't know. Going back and sanitizing that, to me, doesn't feel right.
Yeah, that is interesting, because I do feel like a lot of audiophiles, like you were saying, musicians in general. I feel like a lot of us can be very picky over what we like, and I would feel like someone who is an expert in audio, just like yourself, would probably be the most prone to that, just because you can hear all the little nuances that, on average, most people cannot. Let alone artists. For those of you guys who are just like casual listeners or casual people that are not musicians, I know you probably hear this, but engineering and the intricacies of audio is incredibly and vastly different than just singing a song. And that's not taking away from being a songwriter. You know, there's different skill sets everywhere. But I'm just saying, like, the science behind it all is incredibly insane. So someone like you who specializes in understanding how all the frequencies function together and how you can like manipulate them in ways, I feel like you, out of all people, would be more prone to that. But you're also very much on the mindset of like, hey, I'm gonna work on something, and once it's out, it's gone out of my hands, and I'm moving on. Is that your personality? You would say, like, are you like that with most things, or did you train yourself or learn how to be like that just with music, and then maybe you're not? Maybe you are more of a perfectionist outside of music. I don't know, but I'm wondering.
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely something I've had to work at. It's not something that came naturally to me, but there are things like thinking strictly about engineering, right? I remember when I was in school and I was going to classes and learning about, your examples, frequencies, where to place a microphone, all these things. Man, part of it, I was, a little bit of a stoner in college, and a lot of it was just really hard for me to pay attention to, right? I was never much for science. And so even when it was applied to music, it was like, okay, here's how you mathematically cut your frequencies. I was like, I don't really care. I just want to learn how to make music, and I want to learn how to produce music for myself, because that's where it was starting, right? It was in my dorm room. I was making music and trying to figure out, like, how do I record a guitar? How do I put a drum beat in there? How do I put a drum beat that doesn't sound like shit into this? And so that was part of it for me. But it's a thing where it's like, I try to stay away from that engineer perfectionist, bogged down in the details mindset. But I do think there are times where I do get too bogged down in the business side of it, or the perfectionist of for me, it's the instrumentals. I think with my vocals, I've never considered myself a vocalist first. I've always considered myself a producer first, and that's changing. But I get way more perfectionist about my productions than I do about my singing. And there are a lot of times that I have to just take a step back from a song for like months and just clear the palette, because I get too sucked into what I need it to be versus like what the song actually is and what best supports the song. And I think like it can almost be addicting to sit there and play with a synthesizer and shape it and craft it for like 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours till it's 4 a.m. and you're like, whoa, what?
Where'd the time go? Yeah.
Yeah. And so to some degree, I think that's an unhealthy obsession for me that I've had to work out of, both from a, getting 8 hours of sleep standpoint, but also from a being able to keep some of my art at arm's length in order to best serve the art.
Can I ask you, this is something that I think is very fascinating, because I have had the opportunity to interview some pretty well-known producers, but I've never really had the opportunity to explore what it's like to learn about like mixing and mastering and that whole thing, because I have learned how to mix, but mostly on my own. I didn't go to school for it.
Yeah.
I studied music business in school, and we did have like 1 or 2 courses about engineering. It was very light, very much like, just beginner surface level stuff. But one thing I took away from my experience in school was how very rigid that structure was. Now, granted, that could have just been my course. That could have just been my experience in my school. But I'm willing to say I feel like it is the same across the board. But again, I'm curious about what you think. I noticed just how very strict it was. Very much like, okay, in order to mix something properly, you got to do A, B, C, D, and E. And it's got to look like this, and it's got to function like this. And I understand why, because it's very technical. A lot of things are software. A lot of things are machines. You got to know how that functions. So I guess my question is, in your experience, being the way you are, being as free-flowing as you are, and how you are open to discovering new things, and your music is an example of that, how open your mind is to just exploring random concepts. Was the schooling very rigid, and did you have to break away from that? Or did you happen to have an experience that allowed you to kind of flourish whichever way you wanted to while teaching you basics? Does that make sense? Oh, hang on. I cannot hear you. I'm sorry, man. Give me a second here.
Good. Can you hear me now?
There you go. There you go.
Okay, I'll start that one over. I think I'm really lucky in the sense that my program, I didn't go to a big music school. I went to a really small liberal arts school in bumfuck PA. And the reason I say I'm lucky is I came in as a business major. I quit that, became an English major. And the year that I became an English major, my school brought in this incredibly just amazing professor. I believe he was teaching at Tulane before, and he started an engineering program there. They brought him over to do a music production program at our school. And so I was lucky enough to be one of the first people in that class, in that that field of study at my school, along with a couple other people. And it was something where like we were kind of building it from the ground up together. And my professor, I mean, he's an engineer outside of being an audio engineer too. I mean, he's a very technical person, but he's also a very gifted, to use your word, free form, free flowing musician. I mean, he makes music concrete that's based entirely on his voice and nothing else. And he hates form and he hates convention, even though he does apply all of this crazy science to his music and his engineering. And so he taught us the fundamentals, but he also never encouraged us to only pay attention to that. You know, he really gave us leeway. Like my senior project was, he said, okay, we have a studio in the basement. Go lock yourself in there every day. You know, it was me and one other person. Go record an EP. Go just do it. You know, take everything that I've taught you and just apply it. Don't go back to the books. Just do it. And trust your ear, trust your creativity, trust your ear. At the same time, you know, I'm sitting in front of this brand new Neve console that he brought over, and he was like, no, here's the rules about that. Don't fuck that up, because that's worth more than your entire life. So there's rules and things for the studio. And I know a lot of people who run studios are very, very regimented, like almost militarily regimented about their studios. So there was that, but I think outside of that, in terms of just protecting the equipment, I think I was really lucky in the sense that I got to just be creative within that major and really explore applying the engineering and applying the mixing and learning, I mean, very basic mastering to the songwriting and to the instrumentation and the singing. And I got to just kind of do everything all at once and really apply it into making a project, which I think was really cool. And I don't have the perspective to know if that's how other programs are, but I just know that that was my experience. And in fact, thanks for it.
And I'm glad that you have an experience like that, because I do feel like, from what I hear, and again, this is me generalizing, and I'm not, you know, I don't have the experience to say, you know, that every single course is like this, but it's just based on me just observing what I see. And I do find that when it comes to that side of the business, there is this creativity that you need to be a good mixer and a good engineer. But what I've noticed is that it's something that at some point engineers have to kind of go out and figure out for themselves. And it's not something that, A, it's not easily taught, but B, it's something that's not usually encouraged to do. Now, by that, I mean, like, it's like, hey, this is how frequencies function. They should be here. A snare drum should be in this area. The vocal should be in this area. I don't know. I'm just kind of rambling. But my point is, I'm glad that you had the experience where you were able to have that freedom to explore. And I'm wondering, I guess the question there is, how does that connect to where you're exploring unique ideas? Because granted, you had a fantastic experience in college and a phenomenal teacher by the sound of it. Do you know his name? Shout out to you.
Yeah, shout out to Professor Paul Botello.
Paul Botello, there you go. Shout out to you, man. Hopefully, if you're watching this, you know, thumbs up to you. But my whole point is, you know, you take this course, you start to engineer, you start to understand that concept, but then at some point you find yourself making very interesting, what do you call it? Dark synth pop or like trippy synth pop? What is your term?
Yeah, my term, man, I don't even know how to describe it, but it straddles that dark synth pop. I combine some industrial elements, some trip hop. But I also, what's really important to me is whatever form my music is taking sonically, what I really care about is keeping it in a convention of pop and experimental pop in particular, because I love the form of pop. I think it's popular for a reason, right?
Right.
I think it's cool to try to break the conventions of it sometimes. And so the music I listen to can be like all over the place, really, really dense to blues. I came up when I was first learning music as a blues guitarist, and I grew up in choral music. And so I think part of it, to answer your question, is I grew up listening to what is now very conventional music. I think you can look back at the blues and say it was very experimental for the time. And same for choral music. It definitely went through evolutions and revolutions. And now to our ears, it can be very conventional and standard. So I think when I was growing up, I felt really suffocated by choral music in particular. Blues was something I sought out because I really wanted to play the guitar, but it's always been something where I'm kind of chasing that next sound and pushing the boundaries of my own listening habits. And so I think what happens is just naturally my music has progressed with that. The kind of music I'm making is very different than the music I was making 3, 5, 7 years ago. The first song I ever recorded was like a Jason Mraz style folk song that
of course.
Yeah, of course. Right. And so, but I think I've tried to put on all these different hats and just find what feels right in the moment. And so that's kind of where that comes from.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that you are, I love the whole Jason Mraz thing.
Oh, I had the fedora and everything too. It was a weird time for me in middle school.
It's a weird time for everybody. For a lot of people, especially guitarists, went through that phase because Jason Mraz is fantastic. You know what he did at the time was phenomenal for songwriting in general. A lot of those early 2000s songwriters that came out from that era really had a unique style that kind of cemented what a lot of people do nowadays, even though it's different. It's like Jason Mraz, Sarah Bareilles, John Mayer came out of that too. Who else came out of that? I forget. There's so many. I'm losing them right now. But my point is, yes, you're not alone. Lots of us went through that process. And I like that you just became comfortable with allowing your brain to just kind of go where it wanted. Because oddly enough, and I've talked about this plenty of times on the show with different kinds of people from different genres, but I do find that as awesome and as creative music can be, once you get to a certain skill level, and maybe this is the same for a lot of other industries too, but I can only speak for music, is it can become very boxy. You know, like once you get to a certain skill level and you get to a certain level of success or stature, it gets harder to break out of that. Yeah. Because you understand how everything works. You understand how the game is played. You understand how things sound. So you're like, you have your rules. We've been talking about this. You have your steps and stuff. And it can be very difficult to break away from that. But I feel like you almost would much rather be in that cusp than to be, you know, in that like rigid mode. And like we said earlier, there you do have a pop structure because, you know, pop works for a reason, but you tend to shy more to the edge, which I like. You might have found a good balance of still staying pop, but being weird enough where it's like something else. You know what I mean? Yeah,
thank you. I mean, that's honestly really cool to hear, right? And I have to fight against being rigid all the time. You know, I used to build like templates in my Logic files, right? The place that I'm working and creating my music is Logic Pro. And so I used to build templates so I could just open it up, didn't have to do a thing and just go and start making music. And that's nice. It's convenient. I've stopped doing that because what I found was happening was I would get into a pattern. And I think boxy is like a perfect way of thinking about it because I was getting boxed in. I mean, I wrote this album over 3 years and I know the chronology of all the songs. The songs are not in chronological order in terms of how I wrote them in the track list. But me knowing it, listening back to all these songs, I'm like, there's a clear distinction between the songs I wrote, maybe the first half of the chronology and the second half. And I think part of it was I had to just stop doing the routine. I had to stop using the same synthesizer, using the same drum samples or the same drum machine or playing the guitar in the same tuning. I think with creativity, variety is practice and variety are simultaneously equally important because you have to practice, you have to know your instrument or your medium or your own voice, your own body, whatever it is that you're doing. But you also have to be able to change things up because without variety, things become stale, that you feel boxed in. And I think the more music I create, there's also a pressure within myself to match up to things I've put out in the past. It's really, really easy with Spotify. I think, I'm not sure, right? Because I wasn't from a pre-Spotify era, but I think what might be different about Spotify and Apple Music and just seeing these streaming platforms is there's more access for everybody to put music out. But at the same time, you can see at any time of the day how well you're doing if you're counting well and success by your number of streams. But you also can see how well everybody else is doing. And I say well just because I think, from earlier in the conversation, there is that pressure to generate streams and generate playlists and this push to get your music. I know with Spotify, it's like to get it on the Spotify algorithm. And I think it's really unhealthy because you look around, it's another form of social media, I think, for musicians, right? Because you're looking at your peers, you're looking at other artists who are similar to you or in the same ballpark and seeing what they're doing. And there's this box that you get put in by yourself because it's completely invisible to everyone else. It's something that only I live in, but I'll look and be like, oh, that person's got like 11,000 streams after their first week. Right. But who cares? Right. And I'm always happy for people. Right. But it's sometimes I do have that urge where I'm like, oh, well, why isn't this song meeting the expectations that I thought it was going to have? But it's only because it's self-imposed.
Yeah. And all of it, to some extent, can be self-imposed. And you're right. I do feel like it's an interesting observation that we do have access to all these like tools and how even though they're brilliant in what they can do and what they can do to help you get better, it's a double-edged sword. And I sound old saying this and also very cliche. There's so many people that talk about this, like the dangers of technology and blah, blah, blah. That's not at all what I'm getting at. I do feel like what you're saying and the approach that you're doing, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm gathering that you're saying is you're aware of what's going on. You don't ignore it. You just understand, hey, it's a tool. This is what I have. And I understand that if left unchecked, I can go so far to the point where it's a detriment to me, where I can't even function anymore. So the idea is to recognize it, look at it, understand it, what it is. And once you start to feel that insecurity or that comparison or whatever, you just stop it and you focus back on what you're doing and allow yourself to do that. That's what it sounds like you're doing to me. And it sounds like what most successful people do overall, no matter what.
Yeah. And I think there's this weird thing like, okay, so this is like an inside baseball artist thing where like specific to Spotify, you put a song out on Spotify and the way that they work, and this is why I say it's social media in a certain sense, because social media is all built on that, like, that instant hit of euphoria or the validation, right? You get a like or you get a comment or whatever it is. Spotify can be the same way for artists, and they keep you coming back. So the way it works is you put a song out, it goes into your Spotify for Artists, which is the thing that we use to kind of track our music and our stats and get more information on who's listening and where. And to your point, it's really helpful. I mean, it's, as somebody who can nerd out about numbers and stuff, like that's really, really helpful and almost fun. The bad part about it is for that first week, they update it like every hour. So I've caught myself when I put a song out, just constantly, I can be walking down the street, just constantly refreshing. Cause it's that hit, it's that endorphin hit of like, oh, wow, I got another 100 streams. I got another 100 streams. It's like, it's crazy. It's legitimately insane. After that first week, then it calms down and they only update it at like, I think it's like 3 p.m. every day or something. But even knowing it's at 3 p.m., I've still found myself most days since I've put my last song out, first thing in the morning, I'm checking Spotify for Artists. Even though I know it's not updated, it's just that endorphin hit. And so I think with the,
like maybe it changed, maybe it went up. I don't know.
Yeah.
But even though subconsciously, it didn't.
Yeah. And I think it's, with all of these technology platforms, there's the incentivization to keep you coming back. Their currency is your time. And even with Spotify, like creating a platform for artists, it's still something where they're like, but we need you to spend time on it. We need you to be here and not on Apple Music or not on your SoundCloud app or spending any time anywhere else. Focus on us. And that can be it can be unhealthy, I think, if you let it be.
Yeah, but it doesn't seem like it gets to you though. Like you've managed to move above that, or I don't know, you might have it in check, I guess I would say.
Yeah, I don't want to say I've moved above it because I still definitely fall for the trick sometimes. It's just something where I just have to remind myself to stay grounded and to keep things in perspective. Because if I don't, then I know it's just going to be something that goes to my head, and I have to, that's the balance, right? Is like, I want things to be successful, but I'm constantly having to redefine like, what does success mean to me? Because on one hand, it's, yeah, I just care about making music and putting it out and expressing myself and creating community. And that's real. That's a core part of who I am. But at the same time, when you get these things that are giving you these hits of validation, it's really tough to step back from. Like, the reason I bring up pre-Spotify times is in my mind, I think about these bands, these artists who maybe they're only getting an update from their label like once a week, right? Like they might go into the label, or their tour manager or their manager might tell them like, yeah, okay, we've sold 7,000 records this weekend or something, because people are just buying it on vinyl or CDs like that in the days before Napster and everything kind of disrupted the industry. And now it's like, I don't even need that. I can just check it whenever I want. So I'm definitely not above it, but I think it's something that I've learned to give myself time away from, to force myself to take time away from it.
I love it. And I love that you seem very healthy in the way that you approach your music. That's why I wanted to talk to you. And that's why I think it's what you say is very important, because you're not the only one saying it. I feel like there's so many people that say this sort of thing, but I do feel like it's a repetition kind of thing. The more you hear it, the more it helps. And at one point it'll stick and it'll help you in the way that it needs to help you. And I do appreciate you being open-minded enough to just have an open dialogue, by the way.
Yeah, of course.
I know it isn't, it isn't always easy to dive into those rabbit holes and share your opinion, but this is, in my opinion, having these kind of conversations is what help us all move forward collectively. And that's the goal here, is to help, whether you're notable as an artist, or you're up and coming, or you're just some hobbyist somewhere. Like, the whole goal is to help you just find your bearings. And I think, Connor, you've done an excellent job today of just expressing your ideas, expressing how you've come up with your style, your history in a way. And I do appreciate your time of just being open-minded. It's much appreciated. And to sort of start ending things off, I'm wondering if you can kind of give us a sneak peek of what it is that you have on your plate. I know that you were talking about your single. Mm-hmm. I believe you have an album coming out very soon, or it might already be out. But if you can just kind of give me a lowdown of what's on your plate, and then maybe we can kind of circle back to what we talked about a little bit earlier. Maybe talk about some of the stuff that you think might happen for you later this year once things hopefully open up a little bit better.
Yeah. Well, and hey, thank you for having me. This has been a really, really fun conversation. I mean, being able to talk about music is like my favorite thing in the world. And
it's fun.
Yeah, it's fun. It's it's part of the reason I do this. And I love being able to give back in whatever way I can, even if it's just a conversation. So I appreciate you creating space for artists to do that.
Absolutely, man. And the feeling is, we're going to go around in circles. But I wouldn't do this. I wouldn't be able to do this if there weren't for people like you willing to talk. Yeah. So the feeling's mutual. Yeah.
And so as far as stuff that's coming down the pipeline, so I put my song out. The first single from the album is called You Will Find a Garden. So that's out. You can stream it on Spotify, Apple Music. I'll shameless plug all the streaming services there. The next song is called Connect. It's going to be out on April 23rd. The song is, these two songs are kind of a coin to each other. So by that, I mean, it's that they're each one face of the coin, where You Will Find a Garden is this more upbeat kind of bittersweet song of longing for love. And this other song, Connect, is kind of the darker side of that. The times where you're really feeling low and missing somebody. And, I think this song was really interesting because a friend of mine, Lucas Rizzo, and I wrote it. He's a UK-based artist. We wrote it for a contest, and originally it was going to be his song. And as we went on, we just kind of decided maybe it will work better for my album. And he was gracious enough to let me record the song. And I'm really proud of it. I think it's going to be really fun to put out. And then beyond that, the album's coming. I have not set a date to the earlier part of the conversation, I'm living very much like day to day in terms of putting this album out, but I think I'd like to put it out sometime in August or September. Feels right to me.
That sounds about right too, man.
Yeah.
Well, Connor, I want to say thank you for your time. Again, I really appreciate it. You've got a great voice, by the way.
Thank you.
It's very soothing.
Thank you.
So you might want to look into podcasting or something.
Yeah.
I give you the thumb of approval. It sounds really good.
Well, hey, if I do, all credit will go to you. Thank you.
For sure, man. Well, hey, thank you so much, and all the best wishes to you, man.
Yeah, you as well. Stay safe, stay healthy, and thank you again.